This is going to be our last episode of the year, if you couldn't tell. In this episode, I'm speaking with Eric Goertzen, and he's the head of the CMC Mission Board. And we talk about missions, we talk about the importance of missions, we talk about how to get involved, and we even address some issues with some short-term missions. We even talk about some issues with colonization, as those have become conversations that are more and more important and more relevant. Please enjoy the episode and ignore the inconsistent wardrobe. So I'm here with Eric Goertzen, who is the head of the mission board for the CMC. He was one of the first people in the CMC, one of the first ministers to really take me under their wing and show me how to do some of these things that you think you can understand, but when you are all of a sudden in the role of a pastor, they're a little bit more complicated, and I'm grateful for him for doing that. We should just start with a few questions about who you are and how you ended up in the CMC specifically, and maybe specifically as how you became a pastor.
Cool. Well, who am I? There's a question. Title, my name is Eric Goertzen. I'm married to a wonderful lady with the name of Erna. She used to be a Kaler. She is. I say that because some people go, "Oh, aren't you part?" She's going to already critique me on this. Don't say that, Eric. But she's one of the Kaler girls, because she's a family of one boy and 8 girls, so it's kind of fun. I've been here in the Grunthal CMC Church. Erna and myself and our family, we came. That would have been the year of 98, I believe, 98, 99, before our third child was born. We have 4 children, 2 girls and 2 boys. 2 of them got married. Well, one got married just over a year ago, my oldest daughter. And then my oldest son got married actually in January of this year, January 2nd. So it'll be 2 of them are gone. The youngest one is 19, grown up already, and end up in the CMC. Well, I'll just answer ending up in the CMC. Erna grew up in South America for a little bit, and then came to Canada, was being raised in the Zimmerfeld Church. I myself was born here in the Steinbach area, and attended the Christian Fellowship, got baptized there in 1990. And we started attending church there, and it's interesting, we felt led to, back then we didn't see this being led. Then we just, something's not comfortable with the way church is going. And that's not, at the time it felt like it was the church's problem, and it wasn't. We realized shortly afterwards that it was God calling us and causing us, because we weren't listening, at least I wasn't, and calling us to go somewhere else because he had something else in mind. And so he made me uncomfortable with what was going on. And actually, when we look back, we go, there was nothing wrong in that church. Specifically, it was just we didn't feel connected. We didn't feel comfortable. So we started searching. And then we ended up here in the Grunthal CMC Church. Again, I believe we became members just before my daughter was born, just after, in the year of 99.
I find that fascinating, because you didn't feel like you had a specific calling to the CMC or a specific calling into ministry, and you felt that the church wasn't right at the time, but it was you who were in the wrong place.
Yeah, again, you don't think of that at the time. You think, wow, we don't like this about the church, and it's not comfortable. We couldn't pinpoint no theology problems. It wasn't the pastor. It wasn't that we had disagreements with people. We could say, well, this we didn't like and this we didn't like, but it wasn't that this was wrong. And that was interesting, because even there I was involved in Awanas. I was involved in Sunday school, the youth program a little bit, bits and pieces in that. And it wasn't like there was not opportunity. There was definite opportunity to serve God in that way. And so then you come to a new church and you don't think about what you're going to be doing in ministry. You just look for a church that you can agree with. You check. I don't recall specifically checking the statement of faith, but I'm sure that I did, because I don't articulate that. But it's like, what is it? And it was comfortable. There's good people here, and we really appreciated the way they made us felt. And I say that of the people, but I can honestly say that, well, that's true. God called us here. And I would not have said it then, but I can say it now.
I find it interesting how different stories go in that regard. But did you have a specific moment of feeling called to be a pastor in particular?
Good question. And I'd have to say, short answer, yes. When we started attending, as any church needs, there's always room for volunteers. So it didn't take long before Erna and myself were trying to, she's raising the kids more so than hands-on than I was. So then I had more room for volunteering in positions. So teach Sunday school, get involved in the youth, that sort of thing, because I enjoy working with teens. I guess my mentality maybe is there sometimes, but that's a good thing. With the CMC, I know we've opened up the process to a little difference, but it was the first time that I was used to, or ever been a part of, or seen how an election process worked. So in 2003, I was elected as a deacon through the process of a brotherhood meeting, which is, I think it was simply brotherhood. I'm not sure if we had membership at that point, where we had membership vote. I wasn't actually at the evening meeting when they did it. If I can take the moment to tell the story, one of my older brothers, I had 4 brothers, he had passed away recently in an accident. And so I was helping my sister-in-law with working on her truck. And it's just down the street from the church. And it was in the evening of the night that this election was happening. And I had no idea who to vote for, but I had brought a set of clothes with. I was going to work in the truck, go to the church, do what I felt was my duty, and then fix the truck. I couldn't fix it. It was driving me crazy. So I drove back to Steinbach from Grunthal, picked up a tool. I was a mechanic at that time. I needed a tool. So I picked up that tool, went home, and I drove by the church, and I just don't know what to do with this. I get home, and Erna had received the phone call that we had been elected. And it was just an interesting feeling to go. So I was uncomfortable. I was confused with this process. But when I received that notification, well, it wasn't specific. The realization was, oh, this is why I felt this way. Now, why would I feel confused about being called into ministry? But I was not uncomfortable with the calling, the way we did the election process. And so I think we went through the process. We said yes, as we felt God calling. We spent almost a year doing it. And then still learning how this works, being on a ministerial team. Grunthal Church, we invite our couples. Yes, our men are elected. Yes, they carry the role. But in the leadership, if the ladies have, when they got young children, they're usually not a part of it very much. But when they can, they attend, and they're part of the meetings, and they put a lot of good, wonderful aspects to a team like that. So we were just learning the process, and Pastor Andrew Weeb was leading at the time, and Pastor Abe Funk, who is retired, still attends here in Grunthal. The statement came up, well, what we need to realize is we've had a deacon election, and Abe I think he was 63 at the time, so we're going to start the process of replacing him as a pastor. I'd never thought about teaching. I thought about teaching, but not as a pastor. Never. Yet at that meeting, when Andrew said that, I immediately literally bit my tongue, because I almost said out loud, I'm not ready yet. Not yet. And I go, where did that come from? It terrified me. So I kept my mouth shut for once. And when we got home, I asked Erna about it, and she said she had the same thought. So we prayed about it, and the election process did confirm what we felt God was calling us into a lay ministry position at that time. And since then, we have stepped into, since 2013, I've been full-time here in the church. So since 2008, we've been a pastor. I've been a pastor in 2013 full time. And again, never would I have wanted, and I can say that not because it's a bad job, it's awesome, but I never would have felt that is what I should be doing in life, is teaching and preaching and shepherding. And yet, when you ask the question, a specific moment, yes, sitting in a meeting, totally overwhelmed with understanding the deaconship, and suddenly realizing God said, this is where you're going, whether you like it or not.
It definitely seems like you, even though it didn't happen all at once, you're involved in Awana, you're involved in church ministry, you're working, you're volunteering, you're doing things. And then, well, this isn't quite feeling right. So the next door opens and you walk through it. Like, it just seems like God leads and you willingly follow. And a good quality of a shepherd is somebody who's willing to be shepherded. And it really seems like your story into ministry is a story of being shepherded through the next gate, and somehow you have the personality or the character traits to just follow that calling.
Well, if I think of other men and women listening to these podcasts, one of the things that, when I was first asked, hey, Eric, I was a single man, do you want to help us with Awana? It's like, I don't know what to do with kids. Like, come on, I'm a 20-year-old adult here. Like, come on. Like, and I didn't see any joy or any calling to it, but they asked and asked, and you get called into it. And like you said, the next step, God was leading. And I didn't mention all the men and women that were a part of my life that would just ask the questions, give affirmation or confirmation that, maybe you would be good at this. I see this in you. And to those listening, you go, well, I'm not going to be the next pastor, Eric. Don't say that. But you never know where God's going to call you, and he always equips. I would have never guessed that I would do this. I would never guess that I would have these gifts, even if I can say that, because it is from God. But he will lead you to the step you need to be, and he will give you the things that you need. And it's awesome when you actually let God do it. You may not see it, but when you start saying yes to things that God is godly things, it's amazing where he'll lead you.
It's really just starting to say yes and being obedient to those things. But it really helps when you, like you said, you have a church family that's like, oh, you actually have gifts in this area. The reason I'm expounding on some of this introductory stuff is I think that a lot of what missions really is following some sort of calling, right? What is the mission board, and what function does it serve for the conference?
So our mission board has been, I don't even know, back in the 50s or 60s. I think it was in the 60s that they started this committee or board, trying to help. How do we do missions? Because we got, let's say, a couple, they feel God's calling, how do we do this? There's organizations, but if any of you have ever gotten any mail, email or otherwise, once you start opening the door to missions, there's no end to the organizations. So I think they got a group of men together to say, how do we help people do missions? Like, they have the drive, they have the desire, they have the gifts, but maybe they have no way of bringing in funds. They have no way of what do we do with our house when we're not home, and all of those things that are entailed. So they got a board together to sort through this, and who can go and what are the criteria. So the function of the board is to assist missionaries in maybe not so much the exact ministry, because there's so many angles to it, so many different ways of being a missionary, as we would call it, full-time, that there's all these little things, bits and pieces they don't know how to sort through. So we help with some of that. We connect with different things like we work with different organizations, working with paperwork. Janet, who is right now the secretary for the conference, does a lot of the paperwork, payroll, sorting out of these sort of things. And some organizations, you've got a group of in this case, the board that can check these things out. And then they can help the missionaries get through all those little details that they don't think of, insurance and travel and stuff like that, so that the missionary can focus on giving out the good news of Christ in their calling. And so it's a very rewarding, it can be extremely, it can make you very busy if you want, like there's no end to it. And can ask anybody on the board, sometimes it's, you can get into it as deep as you want, and you can be as shallow as you want, but it's still a good board to be on. And we try and help missionaries and get missionaries out there, and also to educate the general church population as to who and how this works.
At least more recently, I feel like the mission board has also done work to try to bring a community to the missionaries that are kind of secluded, or at least done more to try to like send out visitors to check in on them, because I think that it can be a lonely lifestyle. By
example, Russ and Nancy Sullivan, who are in Durham, Ontario, and they do a lot of the work that he does is administration, tax papers. Okay, somebody's got to work with those tax papers, and they've been on the field, out in the mission field specifically, we want to call it that. And so when they're in there in downtown Durham, if you like, they can have contact with people, they have good connection with their church, that helps. But you get missionaries who are out on the field. Terry and Rosie Bamman, I'm just picking a couple by names. They were for years out in Papua New Guinea, where they have only the missionary couples and the friends that they create, but in a completely different culture. So yeah, in the past, we have sent out, some of our pastors have gone to visit some of our missionaries. The electronics age does help us to, we've had reports recently. Clint has been doing some video reports from them, but we've Skyped in a missionary couple to do a Sunday morning service. And so You've got it on the screen. And like you said, the nice thing about having a board is that we can set that up here. We can work with the local church and work with the missionary, so that the missionary can still do their mission work, but bring a report without feeling so away from the crowd and away from family and friends. And so that part is another aspect of the mission board that's been fun to do.
Yeah, no, I can definitely see how you can get into it as much as you want, or could take up as much time as you want to give it. So what do you do in your position as chairman of the mission board?
Well, the first thing that chairs always seem to have to take the responsibility as is to lead the meeting. We have meetings, 11 meetings a year, minimum. We take 1 month off in summer. Right now, our board consists of at least 2 ministerial and 6 more, as they call members at large, people who are usually, it seems to be, even if we wouldn't ask of it, they usually come from their local church missions committees. And so as chair, you like, now we have to make sure we have enough board members, and you collect information, you bring it forth. And so you've got people when someone wants to be a missionary, feels God's calling, well, they come to their local church. The local church comes to this board. We have questions, we have discussions, we have meetings with these people to prepare them to hear exactly what they're looking for, if they haven't already figured out where they want to go. So then as a chair, I get to help sort that out. But basically, aside from that, there's no specific difference in my responsibilities on the board than the rest of them. So we all have equal votes, and so we sort out. We have people who get together with a missionary who wants to, let's say somebody wants to go and work with a said field, or they feel called. Well, how much money do you need and all this, and that we have a couple of the members do that. They bring it to the meetings and then we discuss it as a group. So my chair position simply gives me that ability, or the responsibility actually, of trying to help work it out as a team, pointing in the right direction. So it's fairly simple, but it's still enjoyable, and I still get to do all the other parts that everybody else does.
So what are the missions? Like, why should we care about missions? It can be an obvious question, but sometimes it's hard for us to actually put a finger on why exactly we are supposed to be either involved in missions, what to do about missions. We have a vague idea that the Bible tells us it's important, but we don't always know where it says that. I would just like you to give us a better answer than some of these vague ideas. Help us to be a little bit more informed.
When you're involved in church, and first we started involvement, and that varies on age. Where if we're grown up in the church, it's a more of a progressive state. But you receive Christ because you've heard the good news. So that's missions. But you don't think of it that way. When you have people telling you about Christ, when you have people acting it out, they're doing mission work, but we don't see it, or do we label it that way normally? This is life, and these guys are excited, or these ladies are excited, and they're living and talking about what's important to them. If you're a sports fanatic, you can't help but talk about sports. When Christ gets a hold of you, when God says which he's trying to do, when we finally hear it and we allow that, we accept it, if you want to put it that way, it changes. So, and then it's a progress of how. So when I've heard of missions being in church, whether before it was I gave my life to Christ, just being in church, or afterwards and slowly, you hear missions, I hear foreign mission. I hear out of the country, jungle life, trying to learn a language, and that just no, and no. So most of us, I think, push it to the side. But we hear about missions. You said, what is a clear thing? Well, missions is, I think, very simply, spreading the good news. It's giving the gospel, and it's much more than a global, outside of my country. But that's where we go to first, and for good reasons. I mean, I don't think you can ask the question, what is missions, without going to the Great Commission from Christ in Matthew 28. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to obey everything I've commanded to you. And surely I'm with you always to the very end of the age. We see that as the Great Commission. We go, and that's where we probably get that concept of I've got to leave family, friends, and all that. Yes, that is a huge part of missions, because you don't go very far if you keep within your community. Okay, so that's true, and Scripture talks about it. Doesn't say, okay, you need to apply to this organization. You need to get this schooling. No. But that is why most of us go, well, I'm not involved in missions, or I'm not going to get on a missions board, because it is an external thing that I'm not gifted in, and that is our go-to. And we read that Scripture in here, go into all nations. And we hear it other words in Acts, when the church was just starting to get, they're hoping, this is even preceding the Holy Spirit. Acts chapter 1, verse 8 says, but you will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come on you, and you will be my witnesses, Jerusalem, and in all Judea and Samaria, and to all the ends of the earth. So we hear the last half of the sentence, the ends of the earth. But he says, first, you're going to do it in your own backyard. And that, I think, is what missions is. 1 Chronicles 16, declare his glory among the nations, his marvelous deeds among all peoples. It's a declaration. Missions is telling what you just can't keep inside. And what that looks like changes with the calling. Yeah. I get to do missions on a local basis. You get to it right now by presenting this. We're hoping to reach our conference. But the wonderful thing about our electronics now is that we can reach the world. As soon as we reach out and we tell the good news. And that happens in word. And I think even more importantly, especially for everyone who's of the Church of Christ, it's what we do, in the day-to-day things, among the people in Jerusalem. That is just such an important thing. And we hear that in the New Testament, Jesus stating those words. And yet we hear it throughout, just by going to pull out Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 7. But the Lord said to me, do not say I am too young. You must go to everyone I send you to and say whatever I command you. Do not be afraid of them, for I am with you and will rescue you, declares the Lord. Old Testament, we think, well, that's just to the prophet. But he does that, like I said, I didn't know that I was going to be a minister, but he sent someone to say, hey, could you teach a bunch of 8-year-old boys? I can play games with them. I can teach them a verse or two if you give me a book. And there's missions.
I think you're right. We're all called to missions. And I think we're all called to be mission-minded to some extent. We're at least called to be kingdom-minded. And if we are kingdom-minded, we want to invite others into that kingdom. That's kind of why I want to focus a little bit more on your calling, because your calling really is just a progression of, okay, I can do that. Oh, yeah, I'm willing to do that. And that is so important for our attitudes. I think the Great Commission does call us to go and to the nations, but its emphasis is on making disciples. The command is make disciples, and the going is part of that. It's included in that, and to all nations is part of that, but the goal is to make disciples. And like you said, a lot of scripture tells us that let's start in Jerusalem, start at home and go out from there. And honestly, if you can be a minister while at home, constantly be thinking like, how can I reach the people around me at home? Because that's where you're comfortable. You want to relax. You don't want to think missionally while you're at home. But if you can start there and propagate out, maybe reaching the nations is something that you send a few people to do while you are focused, just ministering where you are at. I was going to ask, what is the best thing that we can do to be a part of disciple making? And I think you really just nailed it by saying obedience. Is there anything else should be added to that?
I think, like you said, it's obedience. When I say this verse, if I say the Isaiah chapter 6 verse 8, some of us will know what that is, and I'm not good with referencing, but when we hear the verse, then we think, okay, yeah, obedience. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send, and who will go for us? And I said, here am I, send me. And that attitude. The problem, I'll say it for myself. The problem with me is where I hear that, I don't want to go. I want to stay. You made that. Like, it's harder to, in theory, it's easier to be a mission in the jungle because you got no internet, you got no TV, you got no neighbors, no football, no et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's no ice cream stand in the corner. So what do? Well, you're immersed. And so you've already said, here I am, I'll go. But when you're getting up at 7 o'clock in the morning, trying to get to work by 8, punching a clock, going through the motions because this is your job, how do you be a missionary? You don't think that way. But that is actually a huge, there is in our conference, I believe we have 12 or 13 singles or couples missionaries that we support with finances and otherwise, on a regular basis, full-time missionaries. And we're a church of 1,000. Membership conference wise, plus the people who attend as well are, and that number is fluctuating. It's not a high percentage. So if you look in your church, if a church, if you got 100 people, if 10%, so one couple goes out and does mission work, as we call it, what do the rest of us do? Well, we work 9 to 5, we raise our families, but there's the 90% has the job of spreading the gospel here at home. And spreading the gospel is mission work. I think, like you say, it's easy to say, oh, God has called this couple to do mission work. And we're comfortable with that because then I don't have to go. I can hopefully support them in prayer and mentally and emotionally, hopefully financially as well, because that's all a part of it, that parts. But as long as I don't have to go. And yet I think just listening to some of the people locally, a huge mission is reaching out to those right now who are shut-ins. Okay, winter's coming. Some people don't like to drive when it's minus 30 and icy. I think it's great fun, but not everybody does. So you can be sitting at home in the same way. I can't go out. I don't enjoy it, but we have the technology. You can do mission work by phoning the widow, by phoning the young mom, by phoning the unemployed, making a meal. There's I'll use the word in these Mennonite circles, the cooking is awesome. Okay. We can share food, and we all go out for supper because it's a treat, right? So we don't have to cook, don't have to do dishes. But when you invite someone into your home or you get invited, that's mission work because they know that you're doing this in Christ. I mean, the biggest, if I could say it, mission outreach at that point is simply, let's thank God for this meal.
I completely agree with what you're saying. And I just want to ask a question that might contradict. Sometimes I think we take this great idea of, okay, I can do missions wherever I'm at, because missions is an attitude. It's a desire to spread the gospel and make disciples. And that's excellent. But you can also have a generation that there is possibly less and less people willing to sign up for some sort of actual dedicated mission work, because people are like, wherever I am, that's the mission field. Even though they struggle to actually do the work of making disciples because they're like, well, I'm nervous or I'm shy or I don't want to make people uncomfortable, so I keep to myself. Well, you haven't even invited anybody over. You haven't tried to make friends with these people. You haven't even put yourself out there. And I'm saying those things about somebody else, but that is me. Like I struggle to be hospitable. I struggle to be warm and welcoming. Like when I'm working a construction job, I struggle to actually practically make my workplace a mission field. And then I've simultaneously avoided my personal responsibility to do missions and disciple making wherever I'm at, and avoided being sent somewhere else.
Yeah, I think you said it. It's almost harder to do missions at home than it would be abroad. Part of that is because we say, well, I wasn't called to leave. Like I can't learn Low German for the life of me. Okay? I know just enough words to get me in trouble. And yet I've been in a culture from home life and throughout my life of where Low German is prevalent. So for me to go into another country and learn how to speak French or Portuguese or whatever language would be, from my point of view, pretty much impossible. So we use excuses like that to not go. So we stay home, and it's true, missions is right here, and it's a huge responsibility because you become comfortable. And you said it too, like, well, this is not my character. I have been given a gift, if I can say this, and I don't say this with pride in myself, but a gift of gab, as we call it negatively, but I like to talk. Okay, I enjoy it, and I like to teach. Whether I do it great or not is debatable. Well, we won't go there, but we say, well, that's my character, but God has led me into that. God leads you into that, and you hit that very nicely on the head. Well, I'm a missionary at home, so I don't have to go out. Well, okay, how are you doing it? When it comes to being a missionary at home, we get so comfortable because, well, I don't have to do anything. And we become less and less passionate about what Christ has given us because we're comfortable. We get complacent, and then we're not doing our duty. And that's not a good thing. And it's very easily done. I mean, whether we do it full time or not, we're going to find ourselves complacent. And a part of our Canadian society, thankfully, we are spoiled. We just are. We live in an amazing country, an amazing time in history, and we can be very self-absorbed very quickly. And that's not what the gospel is about. It's about serving others. And so it runs contrary to our character, and it runs contrary to what Satan wants, the fall of man, the sinfulness part of us. So it's a struggle. So when we find ourselves comfortable, missions are hard.
No, I think you made a lot of great points there. I think we do get sucked into that comfort. There are lots of people asking about the legitimacy of missions that are going outside of our culture, especially short-term missions. And honestly, I think that they might be right, that short-term missions are often more harmful than good. You can go in, try to fix something, and then you jet out and you've left a bigger gap because of just coming in so quickly and leaving so quickly. You've left this void, even though you've gone in and done a good thing. You've almost caused more damage to be able to do that. So I don't know exactly how to move forward, but how do you think we should move forward in spreading the gospel without spreading our culture that comes with it?
You know, you made some extremely valid points and some good questions. Coming from the Board of Missions concept, one of the things we hear, and is true, short-term missions are expensive. Okay, for what you're doing in time-wise, we understand that. Okay, if you're driving to Mexico on a holiday, your airfare is the same if you go for a day or if you go for a month. So if you consider it, it's expensive for short-term missionaries. So we want to pull back on that is the concept. Now I'm looking at it from the negative side at this point. To go in to, Pat, we get the idea that you're going to go in, you're going to fix this problem we've got, which is, if I can say this without being too negative, the North American, especially, and I will say from my Canadian point of view, not trying to insult my neighbors, but the Canadian point of view is, well, if I go in and I work 5 days in a week and I can put in 14-hour days, I can fix this problem. And from the outside, it looks that way. Like if it's a housing problem, that almost makes sense. It actually can. And you go into this and you pour yourself into it, like teaching the good news. And that is planting the seeds is very, very important. But on the negative side, we go in, we quickly do it, and then we run out. Like you said, now we leave this void. I think they have their place. Short-term missions, cost aside, there's anything costs, whether it's time or money. I think it's a good way to get people introduced into missions to understand a little bit better, because you don't realize what the need is, I think, until you're actually on the ground. And I've done very little, but I can say the little bit that I've seen and done, it makes sense. And it has helped me in my understanding of missions. And I think with this, leaving our culture outside of it is very difficult, short-term or long-term. And of course, right now our society is bent upon the sins of our past in trying to, teach people about Christ. We have taken and tried to make them like ourselves. That's typical. Okay. If I invite you over to my place, I'm going to feed you food that I like. I'm going to watch a movie that I like. I'm going to talk about things that I like. And I'm going to try and get you to be like me, because then we can get along better. And we do that with our Christianity. And it's a very difficult thing to not do that, because if you're passionate about something, you're going to portray it. And you're going to portray it from your concept. So for me, coming from a suburb in Canada and going out into a missionary field where you're working in the slums, you want to fix their problem because they don't want to hear what you want to say until you help them.
Mhm.
So then it looks like we're trying to make them like Canada, if you want to use that, or one of the words we hear quite often around here is colonization. And we're trying to make them like us because we're better, and we know we're not. So a hard part about missions is going in, giving the gospel, and yet letting them still be who they are as God has made them. It's difficult because of the fall of man to work within the confines of our sinfulness and still tell them about a perfect God and not change them.
Yeah.
So it's difficult. Short-term missions do come with some hard things to work with. That does leave some problems, but sometimes I think short-term missions leads to long-term missions, and then therefore they're a good thing. So
Right.
we will always have to struggle with the good and the bad, cost versus, what you bang for your buck. We're Mennonites, so I can joke about that. We want to get the best we can. So it's short-term missions sometimes seem to be a lost cause, but I think they're good because they get people involved. Bite-sized piece. It helps people to realize that there is a greater need. And when we see that maybe we've not filled all the gaps once we pull back, it does cause some problems, but hopefully that will allow us to listen to the Spirit and reach out in better ways, in long-term ways, to not change the people from the outside, but give them Christ and let Christ change them. But we shouldn't want to make them like us. And
Mhm.
it looks that way sometimes. And because of our sinful nature, we don't have to look far to see where we made mistakes, and it looks like we're not actually giving them the Christ, but we're giving them, modernization, which isn't always a good thing.
I think you picked up on the biggest benefit of short-term missions is education. Education not for the people that you're ministering to, but for the people that are going, right?
Yes.
It's an opportunity to see how this looks like in whatever setting you are interested in. We want to give people that education without costing the people that are giving it to us, right?
Yeah.
Ideally, you aren't going to do short-term missions in a place that doesn't have some sort of established mission. If we are going to do short-term missions, they have to be almost more short-term education trips. Even if you get involved with some of the hands-on work, you are doing it because there are people that have relationships already built. You're
Yes.
doing it through people that are going to stick around. Like there's that relationship, I think, is the big takeaway there. There's a trust in the group that's staying and the people that are sticking around who are fully invested. And then the short-term people can come in, they can learn, they can be involved up to a point, and then they can leave better informed about what it looks like because they've seen firsthand, not just the culture, but they've seen firsthand the people that are integrating into that culture.
Yeah, you hit a beautiful point there. And I can't send in a group of 5 or 20 for a short term unless there's an established connection. Because I can't just walk into a culture I know nothing about with a $5 bill in my hand and say, hey, I'm going to fix your problems, because I don't know them. So I think like I said, I was rattling off some of the negative side, but the positive side is, like you said, there is a connection, and this is helpful. We should concentrate on the good part. They're going there and helping an established missionary or missions and do things that they can't do in a short period of time. And the education is priceless. The experience is amazing for the little bit that I've seen and talked to people. And they're not going out and being hands-on for a year, but they've given that established missionary or missions group a huge lift, emotionally, supportively, and work-wise, to continue doing that. And I think the people group that they're reaching out to, the benefit is they actually see, it's not just this guy is interested, the church is interested.
Yeah, and I do think that there are those benefits, but they have to be done with connections to fully established relationships. That's I think that's very crucial. But the question that I want to pose to you is, how do we help? I don't want to just help you get a few more donations from people watching this, which would be excellent. I'm sure it'd be incredible if a few more donations come into the mission board. Mm-hmm. But is there a way that we can actually make more permanent connections with missionaries? If we as individuals can take more responsibility to encourage and support people in prayer, people out doing mission work out there, we will take on more of a mission-minded attitude.
You know, it's probably been said a million times, but if you want to be more connected, you have to connect. So it's amazing sitting in my office, by example, during a day, and I've been by myself and doing what I need to do. A 5-word text, hey, thinking of you, or and it doesn't have to mean those words, just the fact that somebody asks you a very basic question. Or I get a phone call and the person on the other side, hey, I got 5 minutes. I just wanted to see how it's going. And we don't talk about ministries per se. We don't talk about missions. We don't say, well, you know, because a pastor, well, the reason the pastor gets a phone call is because I've got a problem. That's when, and that's awesome. But I feel connected when people just say hi, whether it's on the street corner, whether it's through an email, whether it's through a text. We have all these wonderful social media platforms. And if I could say that, how do you ask the question, how do we become more mission-minded? How do we help? Whether the missionary is in Ontario, whether they're in Panama, whether they're in Spain, whether they're in Papua New Guinea, whether they're in your backyard working with youth, reach out. It feels like, oh, I'm just going to be a pest to them. Actually, no. That's the nice thing about social media. You can actually connect a little bit. It's always better in person. Give them a call. Well, I can't phone a missionary if they're in Panama. They're in a different time zone. But we've got ways of doing this. Connect them on a personal level. Because what happens is if I contact you, Alexander, hey, how's it going today? Oh, you know, we do that a few times. The next thing you know, our conversations get deeper. Yeah. You feel that I've connected with you. You will open up more. You will be more invested in me. And the next thing you know, we're praying for each other. We know what the other person needs. And if you're half a world away dealing in a culture you don't understand, we'll use those kind of concepts as missionaries. Dealing with a language, a culture, and people groups you just don't understand, that personal connection is huge.
Yeah.
And we carry each other's burdens that way. You know, whether you're doing it for your pastor, whether you're doing it for your Sunday school teacher, whether the Sunday school teacher is doing it for their kids, whether we do it for our missionaries a world away. You don't have electronics? Use paper and pen. You know, we all love getting letters that aren't bills in the mail. We all like to have electronically or otherwise a connection that isn't associated with give me something. Like you said, missions takes money. We know that. But we're not asking for that. We're asking for how do we connect so we can live better, we can be a better example of who Christ is in our lives, and we do missions better, whether globally or here on our home turf. So connect with each other.
Let's say somebody's watching and they don't know who the missionaries are for the CMC, or they don't know who they can connect with. Is there like a list of email addresses, a list of names at least, that they could look them up on Facebook or Instagram or some platform like that?
Are you connected to a CMC church? If you are, talk to your local missions. And if they don't know, they will contact the conference mission board, maybe myself or one of the other team members. I'm a little afraid of just, here's the list, you can find it all, because sometimes we have to be careful with the information we share on a public system. Like I can put it on the Facebook page kind of concept, but then everybody gets it and then they get spam. We don't want that. So a simple question is ask someone. The conference, you phone Janet at the conference office. We can find that phone number, conference office, conference website, church websites, your local missions committee, the conference mission board, which is made up of members of local committees. We can all do that. talk to someone in your church, talk to your pastor. He probably doesn't have them on speed dial, but he can get those readily. And yeah, I've got a list of them. I just have to cut, paste, and send it if someone really wants them, kind of thing. So there is ways very quickly to find. It doesn't take a lot of work to get the connection. And all these missionaries, once you have their email addresses, by example, we'll use that one. They love sending out their once a month or once every 3 months letter to people, because that gets people connected, and all of a sudden God speaks to you through that way and you find it.
Thank you so much for being here. I've enjoyed this conversation. I think that there's a good benefit for people out there that are looking to be involved. Like you said, it just takes that first step of obedience. Start with Awana, start with leading youth, start just taking those steps of obedience. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for doing this.